Bring in our panel of political strategists, Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker. Very good afternoon to both of you. Grahame, let me start with you. How do you explain what happened in Victoria over the weekend?
Well, it was a rotten result, absolute shocker. And look, again, I think John Howard used to say, you cannot fatten a pig on market day. And if you look at it, I didn't think Matthew Guy had a bad campaign, but going into the campaign, still big chunks of the electorate had no idea who he was. And you just cannot do that. You know, leaders have to... I tell you, talking about leaders, I admire any leader who wins an election. And to the Victorian Premier, you know, terrific effort. Congratulations. However, I cannot stand leaders who tell fibs. You know, he's running around saying this is a positive campaign. This is Labor spent the most expensive state campaign ever on negative advertising, and the last week in Victoria, and the last week is the most expensive negative advertising campaign any state in Australia. So this idea that somehow or other the Labor Party won because they were being positive is absolute piffle.
Well, Bruce Hawker, I'm just getting a really loud drumming noise in my ear. I'm not sure if that's happening outside your studio there. But anyway, let me come to you on that point. Was this about a slick campaign from Labor? You know, they did spend a lot more on advertising, a lot better ground game and so on. Was this about, you know, I guess this is a bit of a process question about the way the campaign was run, or do you think this was about policy?
Look, as you and your panellists said on Saturday night, David, I think when you have a defeat of this magnitude, then it's not just one reason for it. There's a multiplicity of reasons. And I do think, though, that the negativity demonstrated by the opposition and by the Prime Minister when they went very hard around trying to bring Somali and other refugees into the campaign in a very negative sort of way didn't really resonate with the electorate in Victoria. It might resonate elsewhere, but it didn't work in Melbourne particularly. So I think they picked their target audience poorly. I think that the problems inside the Victorian Liberal Party, as demonstrated by the hapless Michael Kroger today and his fight with the former Premier in Victoria, Jeff Kennett, and the problems in the federal Liberal Party all contributed to this big defeat. It was massive. And I'm sorry, you just can't go around saying it was all about negative advertising. I've been in about 40 campaigns, and after every one, someone says, that was the most negative campaign I've ever been involved in. Well, I don't think they're all getting more negative as each campaign goes by. It's just a convenient excuse for losing comprehensively.
No.
Grahame.
No, that's really not right. But you said something that was interesting, the law and order thing. I sort of half agree with that. I think the law and order thing was quite legitimate to raise, and I think it's an important issue. But if you raise it, you have to look like the person who could actually fix it. You know, where a Scott Morrison or a Josh Frydenberg, they look as if they can fix stuff. I'm just not quite sure that the Victorians thought, well, OK, that's an issue.
But Grahame,
could Matthew Guy fix it? Probably not.
Do you think there are lessons for the federal Liberals? Are they right to be? The Victorians pretty worried about those sort of results?
Yeah, too right. You know, the word liberal over the last, 6 months has not smelt terribly good everywhere. But, you know, these morons, or these people who think that Victorian voters are morons, that somehow or other, if you're sitting in Melbourne, you're thinking about Malcolm Turnbull, you're thinking about the federal government, and you're going and vote in a state election, it's just plain stupid. What all that leadership change and the federal stuff did do was perhaps suck some air out of what should have been the front page news for the opposition in Victoria so that they get their issues up. I accept that. But the idea that somehow or other this is a vote on the federal government,
and
quite odd.
I think Barnaby Joyce actually had a good point earlier today where he said what happens often with these sort of things is everyone will latch onto it and say, oh, this is what we need to do to fit their agenda. Whether it's, you know, we need to no longer talk about coal and just build renewables. We need to, you know, change the way we talk about immigration. Or everyone will have their own agenda. I mean, there's no
well, that is right. Well, and if you're talking about communication, I think one of the most important things the Fed should learn from this, and every election in the last 7 or 8 years, is you've got to do some preemptive action now on this Labor sort of thing that the Libs are going to cut health and education, or have cut education and health. It's drivel, but they've got away with it, and it's time the federal Libs took some preemptive action, or they're going to cop it at the next federal election or the New South Wales election, and they have to demonstrate that that is piffle.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, yeah.
I was just going to say, this thing about division, though, is it's just not going away for the Liberal Party, is it? Yeah, we saw it in Victoria. We've seen it in New South Wales. We're seeing it at a federal level. You know, there is something of an ideological struggle going on inside the Liberal Party. The Labor Party's had those sort of struggles in the past, or you have to go back to the 50s and 60s really to see them played out in big form. But it is happening inside the Liberal Party, and people don't like divided parties. You know, that was a problem we had in Canberra in 2010 through to 2016. Labor was seen as a divided party. We couldn't ever really get back onto the front foot once that was ingrained into the public's thinking. And, you know, while this division continues inside the Liberal Party, I think we're going to see more of these sorts of defeats happening around the country.
All right, well, we're now into the final 2 weeks of Parliament, hung Parliament, minority government for Scott Morrison, and the first test has come on the National Integrity Commission idea. Grahame, the government's still considering, looking at what to do here. Is it time to get off the fence and make a call?
Well, I'm not a great believer, and I've no idea what it's going to do. We're going to pay all these judges and everyone else a lot of money to sit around and look at each other. Actually, it crossed my mind the other day.
Or to deal with
we've got lots of judges and barristers signing petitions to calling for it. If the barristers paid their tax fees, we'd probably have the money to pay for it. Look, you know, the idea that somehow or other there's some U-boot corruption thing in Canberra is just silly. I've been here for a long, long time. You know, up to my eyeballs in you know, lots and lots of big decisions. And the idea that somehow or other some group is going to sit over there and have lots of things to do about corruption in Canberra, just pathetic.
Well, there was a survey, you may recall, earlier in the year that said 5% of Commonwealth public servants had witnessed some level of corruption. That's a pretty big number, actually.
Yeah, somebody took some staplers home.
So
well, you want to be careful about being, you know, dismissive about those sorts of things, Grahame. My sense is that this is an issue that, once again, the federal government is just not showing any leadership on. They are out of touch with what the electorate's thinking. I'm not saying that for partisan reasons. They did it with the Royal Commission into the banks. They held off and held off and held off. And now they're doing it with this anti-corruption body that's being proposed. You know, try to get onto the front foot and lead rather than just reacting all the time. And again, I think it's probably because people inside the Liberal and National Party are saying, oh, we don't want to go down that path. You know, we don't want to see what the blowtorch being put onto the belly of people in Canberra.
I mean, look, I'm sure the idea and the suggestion that corruption's going unprosecuted, you know, it makes a lot of people think we need this sort of thing. But there are a lot of agencies that deal with problems in our federal bureaucracy right now. Is there a pretty clear example of where the first investigation would be under such an anti-corruption body?
Oh, well, I'm thinking back to cases in the past. You know, I can't put a crystal ball in front of me and say, oh, look, there's something going on down there. But remember the Australian Wheat Board scandal? I mean, that was appalling. And the Howard government, I think it was, absolutely refused to do anything about it until it was far too late. And again, you know, John Howard, who normally has a pretty good ear or eye for those sorts of things, dropped the ball on that. There are some examples of egregious wrongdoing by people in the federal sphere that give the lie to this suggestion that there isn't a call for an anti-corruption body. See, in New South Wales, a lot of it was actually preventative. You know, not only are they sending a shot across the bows of public servants and politicians and others about corrupt behaviour, but they're also educating people about corrupt behaviour too. I mean, in New South Wales, I can tell you, when they introduced the ICAC, public behaviour or political behaviour and public servants' behaviour changed overnight. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't keep finding people, and they've got to keep going. But I think this sort of sense that the public purse was there to be plundered every now and then went out the window. And that's what I think we need in Canberra as well.
Final one. I was speaking to the Nationals MP Kevin Hogan earlier on the show. He's now sitting on the crossbench. He has for the last few months, but still a National Party member. He is going to move a motion next week for a Royal Commission into supermarkets and petrol retailers. Grahame, what do you think? Would that be a good idea?
No. Bruce said we weren't allowed to oppose anything. Oh, look, I don't know. Maybe you could say should be greater competition, but that's what the ACCC is there for. It's already there to regulate that sort of stuff. The same with petrol. That's their job. Now, if they're not doing their job properly, let's get different people in there. But it seems to me that the ACCC on this sort of stuff is red hot.
Yeah, well, Bruce, would the Labor Party, do you think, be right to jump on this idea?
Well, I think they've got to have policies which address these issues. I don't think the answer is always just having another Royal Commission into something, unless you've actually got a demonstrable example of the way in which the supermarkets or petrol prices are being manipulated. And I'm not sure that case has been made as yet. But I do think that there is I think the political parties have to listen to the way people are thinking and what they're thinking out in the electorate and say, well, why is it that prices are getting out of control? Is there enough competition? Is there enough transparency in this process? Are there examples of cartel-style behaviour out there? Now, if it requires a Royal Commission or some sort of inquiry to get to the bottom of that, well, that's fine. But I don't think we need to have a Royal Commission every time a problem is exposed. That's why we need policies and maybe giving more teeth to the ACCC if they're not getting to the bottom of these problems. But it's good for politicians and political parties to identify these issues and to get on the side of people who are concerned about them.
The first one would be if we want cheaper things, get rid of the trade unions. They're the people who are pushing things up. That'll fix it.
Just before I did say that would be the last one, but just quickly, this one from the ABC, Patricia Carvelis has just reported that Michelle Guthrie, who of course was sacked from the ABC, was given an $800,000 payout as, I guess, part of the dismissal by the looks of it. That's not a bad...
Well, yeah, it was probably in a contract.
Severance?
A contract's a contract. If that was she's entitled to pay,
there you go.
Fair enough.
There you go. All right.
Probably suffered 800 grand's worth of humiliation.
Oh, maybe so. We've got to go. Grahame, Bruce, good to talk to both of you. Thanks so much. We'll catch up again soon. We were talking about